Good morning. I'm pleased to welcome each of you to our second Recharging Reform Judaism conference. My name is Mark Anshin, and I'm one of the coordinators of this conference. We were not planning to have a second conference until the tragic events of October 7th challenged all of us, and especially our dear friends and family in Israel. Ami called me in December and suggested that we needed to hold this conference in order to come together and assess what October 7th and the war means for us as Reformed Jews in North America, and the impact this seminal event in Jewish history will have on our relationship to Israel, the state, the land, the people. How should we, as Reformed Jews, respond, engage with Israel, and work towards strengthening our relationship with all members of our community? Our relationship with Israel is an essential component of our Jewish identity. Now, more than ever, it requires us to think deeply about how we moved forward together. I didn't need to think for more than a few seconds to respond to Ami that we should begin immediately to plan this conference with Tracy and I working together as we did last year. We've all been immersed in October 7th and the horrible aftermath that continues to shatter our emotions every day. Next week, it will be 8 months since the war began. We have all been deeply touched with the personal stories we know of friends and relatives who have been murdered, injured, lost loved ones, and suffered terribly. And we watch in shock the many innocent civilians in Gaza who are being killed and injured, homes destroyed as a result of the war that Israel did not start. Allow me to offer a bit of context for our discussions. I know that many of us are calling our friends and our relatives each week in Israel to touch base and offer our support, listen to their stories of trauma. The degree of connection among us attests to the strength of our community. And on Sunday, I spoke with friends who many in this room know. Eri Castle, the former executive director of the IMPJ and a longtime member of Kibbutz Hatzarim, recounted that just a few weeks ago, a Hamas rocket landed in the kibbutz fields alongside the road that we all drive on to get to the kibbutz. And while his family is safe, the situation is really bad, and everyone worries about not getting the hostages back. For Eri and everyone in Israel, the atmosphere is very heavy. This past Sunday, you may recall that Hamas fired 8 rockets towards Tel Aviv, Herzliya, and Ramat HaSharon. Eri's daughters, who live in the area, called him to say they were safe and their families were safe. And at that point, Eri hadn't yet heard the news of the rocket attack. Hatzarim is the kibbutz where former General Amos Yadlin grew up, and his conversation with Ami on In These Times is an important analysis of the situation, and I encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to take time to listen to that conversation. Eri sends his regards and remembers fondly the close working relationship he had with you, Ami, in your role as Arts Executive Director over 20 years ago, before you came to this extraordinary congregation as the senior rabbi, a milestone celebrated last week by this congregation. Kibbutz Hatzarim is building homes for the members of Kibbutz Be'eri so that they will be able to live together until they can return to their own rebuilt homes on their kibbutz. Kibbutz Be'eri, where our friend Vivian Silver, a Canadian who made Aliyah in 1974, was murdered. For weeks, we thought she had been taken hostage, and we worked with the Canadian government to try and have her released by Hamas. Weeks later, her remains were identified. Vivian made Aliyah and joined Kibbutz Gezer, where she lived for many years before moving to Kibbutz Be'eri in 1990. Kibbutz Gezer, where the funeral service for Vivian was held on November 16th, attended by some 1,500 people, where two of them are our own Rabbi Miri Gold and David Leichman, members of Gezer. And Miri spoke at the funeral. And on Sunday, this past Sunday, I also spoke with Miri and David. Their family is fine, but Israel is not. They do what needs to be done to get by each day. Their trauma continues unabated. And last Shabbat, my wife and I were privileged to host Rabbi Yael Vergen and Cantor Linor Ein-Gedi, the spiritual leaders of our Reform community in Shar HaNegev, in our home for Shabbat dinner. And since October 7th, they have been traveling throughout Israel to be with the members of their community who have had to be dispersed. We all have many stories. The heartbreak remains with us and will be in these halls during these 2 days as we discuss, confer, and think deeply about what we can do to strengthen the bonds even more. Many issues will be discussed: Israel education, social justice and interfaith, anti-Semitism and its impact on campus. One of the issues we will struggle with is how to have constructive conversations with our family members, our children, our friends, who hold conflicting views about Israel, the war, and the prospects for the future, and what role social media plays in the conveying information that informs our views. We have several leaders of our reform organizations attending, and we appreciate that they have made the effort to be with us. From the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism, we welcome once again our dear friend David Bernstein, Director of Development. We are pleased to welcome from the World Union for Progressive Judaism, past Chair Carol Sterling and Vice Chair Andrew Keene, who once again is a member of our conference planning committee and will be speaking at one of our plenary sessions. We are pleased that many of our educators, members of the Association of Reformed Jewish Educators, are with us and have taken on a significant role in plenary and workshop planning. We're delighted to welcome Rabbi David Saperstein and Rabbi Josh Weinberg from the URJ, who will offer important insights into our movement's approach to many of the subjects we will be discussed. We are grateful that members of the HUC-JIR staff and faculty have taken the time away from the responsibilities to be with us, and we especially wish to thank Dr. Andrew Rayfeld, president of the college, who is with us again this year and will be speaking later this morning. Our particular thanks to Stephen Windmuller, who has contributed significantly to the planning of this conference and his contributions to our discussions. Thank you to Rabbi Erica Ash, CCAR president, for being with us and participating in one of our workshops. And I wish to thank my dear friend Ami for hosting this conference and being central to the team that planned this meeting. Our thanks to the staff of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue for their time, energy, and attention to the multitude of details that brings us to this day. To Cantor Dan Singer and the Cantors for providing us with meaningful worship and music experiences, particularly the concert this afternoon. Many of you were instrumental in helping us think about and plan the content of this conference, and there are far too many of you to name all of you, including over 80 rabbis, cantors, educators, temple administrators, and lay leaders who added their names as supporters. We thank each of you for your commitment and ongoing support, and we thank our donors for their wonderful support to this conference. My personal thanks to my close friends, Michael and Roberta Schroeder, for their support and donations, including the registration bags. I end my thanks, once again, with a very special thank you to Rabbi Tracy Kaplowitz. Tracy did the very heavy lifting in coordinating all aspects of this conference. And this conference would not be happening without Tracy's energy and commitment to making it happen. In your bags, you'll find index cards and a pen, as we did last year. These cards are for you to write a question that you may have in each of the plenary sessions. They'll be collected prior to the Q&A in each of those sessions. It's appropriate that we take a moment to begin our time together with a prayer for the state of Israel and a prayer for the hostages. I'm pleased to invite Rabbi Cantor Sam Natoff.
And we thank you, Mark Anshin, for all of the care, love, and support you put into this and work. We offer this prayer for the state of Israel, and we rise. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love. Spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there, and let us say. And we say a prayer on this, the 236th day since our people were taken hostage. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, bless, preserve, and protect the hostages and missing soldiers of the citizens of Israel and the Israel Defense Forces. May God rescue them from captivity and speedily restore them in peace. May the Holy One, blessed be God, show them mercy, increase their strength, remove their pain, and send them a recovery of body and spirit. May God return them to their families swiftly and soon. And let us say, Amen.
Boker Tov. My name is Rabbi Dan Reichenbach. It's so nice to be here with all of you, especially nice to be here at Stephen Wise Free Synagogue, a place that feels like home for me. I was ordained on May 5th of this year with this year's rabbinical and cantorial students. Thank you. Well before I knew I wanted to pursue a career in the rabbinate, I was being supported by people here at Stephen Wise. Rabbi Rena Rifkin knew me as a kid at Eisner Camp, and even though I wasn't an exemplary camper, she had enough faith in me when I was in the educators program at HUC to take me under her wing and show me the complex world of Jewish education, and I'm really forever grateful for that. I learned so much from my time here. I learned from all the different work study jobs I had during my tenure at HUC. But what will define my rabbinate going forward is less what I learned in the classroom and more what I learned while working during school here at Stephen Wise and elsewhere. My time in Israel, both as a student and my time spent in the IDF, and above all, my childhood in NIFTY and the URJ camping system. My time in the URJ camping system and in NIFTY programs made me who I am today. From the youngest age, I was instilled with a love of and a pride in Jewish identity. I was taught that my Judaism is one that is constantly evolving. I learned that as modern Jews integrated into the broader society, it is our mission to be stationed on the front lines of societal change and social causes. I was taught that as a people with a shared history of suffering and persecution, it is our mission to stand on the side of justice and the prophetic calls for equality. I learned that the traditions and rituals of Judaism are a blessing, here to help feed our souls and bring us closer to the spiritual center, the force we call God. And I was taught that a strong connection to Israel and a belief in the project of liberal Zionism was an essential aspect of my Jewish identity. These teachings, gained over a lifetime of involvement in the Reformed Jewish world, are at the very center of my understanding of what it means to be a Reformed Jew, let alone a Reformed rabbi. Yet I am finding myself a somewhat rare case these days. I have friends my age and many who are younger than me who have begun to question exactly what it was that we were taught as kids. Sometimes I feel a bit bewildered because I have always felt like Reformed Jews have been on the front lines of so many different initiatives for change and for social justice. But when I listen to these peers, more than anything, I hear the deep disappointment in their voices and how hopeless it seems now in the wake of October 7th and this most recent war. I do, however, have faith that together as clergy, educators, lay people, and just regular Reformed Jews, we can come together at this time to begin to ask and answer some of the big questions over the next couple of days. To begin these conversations, I would like to introduce Rabbi Amiel Hirsch. Rabbi Hirsch is senior rabbi here at Stephen Wise Free Synagogue and just celebrated 20 years in that position. Rabbi Hirsch is a senior leader in the Reform movement and was previously the head of ARTSA, an organization within the URJ whose mission it is to make Israel fundamental to the sacred lives and Jewish identity of Reformed Jews. You can find Rabbi Hirsch in the podcast space as well with his In These Times with Rabbi Ami Hirsch podcast, which is consistently among the top religion podcasts in the US. Rabbi Hirsch is also an author of 2 books and delivers many noteworthy sermons. And today, Rabbi Hirsch is here to begin our conversations with a keynote address. Please join me in inviting Rabbi Amiel Hirsch to the Bima. Thank you.
Welcome to the second Recharging Reform Judaism Conference. We meet at one of the most consequential times in Jewish history. The world has changed dramatically since we last convened 1 year ago. The skies of Jewish life are cloudier, the horizons murkier. It is dark in the sunshine and difficult to see. As Mark mentioned, we had not planned to gather this year, but the cascading impacts of October 7th on Israel and world Jewry convinced us that the hour demands intense and focused attention by the North American Reform movement. You will hear a broad diversity of views during these 2 days. We purposely designed the conference towards this goal, both in content and form. Take advantage of the many breakout sessions and informal settings to learn, engage, and debate. The point is not so much to agree. We will disagree often with each other, but to identify what are our key challenges going forward and to raise preliminary questions. It will be good for us to spend these 2 days together, to find comfort, consolation, and strength in each other's embrace. We are still traumatized. The cataclysm is so profound that it will take years to fully understand. Time froze. It is still October 7. We have not yet moved on. Our anguish is too raw, our fear and uncertainty too pervasive. The battles are still raging. Israelis are still dying. Palestinians too. Some, as we saw this week, in the saddest and most tragic manner. There are still 120 or so hostages held in Gaza dungeons, alive or dead. Tens of thousands of Israelis are still refugees in their own national home. Formal commissions of investigation have not yet been established. Responsibility for the catastrophes of October 7 has not been examined, assigned, or assumed. The political reckoning is sure to come. Before us are years of recovery. This is an existential moment, not only for Israel, but for us in North America. We are in the midst of a great ideological struggle, the outcome of which will determine whether liberal Judaism will thrive in the diaspora or will fracture and shatter into 1,000 pieces. The question before us is the same one that splintered the Reform movement a century ago and almost broke us. Are we truly committed to Jewish peoplehood? If so, what are our obligations and commitments? Are we truly committed to the Zionist idea and the state of Israel? If so, what are our obligations? We thought that we had resolved these tensions by mid-20th century in the aftermath of the Holocaust and the founding of Israel. We didn't. October 7 revealed to us that our central values, principles we have stated and restated for decades, are under intense pressure from within and without. From without, the West is increasingly hostile to Jewish identity. It is not only Israel. Judaism itself is under withering ideological assault. And hence, the Jewish state is the focus and the target of this hostility. It was inevitable that the rise and spread of identity politics would place the Jew on the wrong side of virtue. Some of us have been warning for years that the abandonment of Western liberal values is always bad for Jews. When we forsake Martin Luther King's understanding of liberalism to judge people not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, when we elevate feelings over facts, bias over evidence, group entitlement over individual merit, cancellation over debate, when we dismiss liberal values as rooted in white privilege, oppression, colonialism, and racism, we have betrayed liberalism and undermined the very foundations that made the West dominant and Western Jews secure. The passions unleashed by an illiberal state of mind threaten both the West and Western Jews. History teaches that once Jew hatred becomes normative, it portends social decay. From within, while most American Jews are committed to Israel and consider the Jewish state an important component of their own Jewish identity, the younger the generation, the greater the opposition, not only to the specific policies of the Israeli government, but to the very existence of this or any Jewish state. Hard questions confront us. Challenges made more difficult by the presence of extremist elements in the Israeli government that are outside the mainstream of normative Jewish and Zionist values and are an embarrassment to most of the world's Jews. I hope that in our plenums and workshops we discuss the impact of the current government on American Jews, especially younger ones, who have come of age knowing essentially only right-wing Israeli governments. I will address three broad challenges of the many that we will engage in the next 2 days. We owe each other a blunt and candid conversation. First, because the times call for it. And second, out of respect, affection, and concern for our movement. Since we represent the large plurality of North American affiliating Jews, the responses we formulate will impact dramatically on the future of American Jewry. One, what have we taught our youth? What are the ramifications of this new period of Jewish history on how we will instruct our youngsters moving forward? In December 2023, over 1,200 current members and alumni of the Union for Reform Judaism, mostly young, signed a letter to the movement's leadership demanding we support an immediate ceasefire. It is, of course, appropriate to debate whether and when a ceasefire should come into effect. It is legitimate, even desirable, to criticize Israeli policies. Many of us do this frequently. It is proper, even necessary, to mourn the loss of life, dislocation, and misery of Palestinian civilians, despite our ubiquitous underestimation of their widespread support of and collaboration with Hamas. To bring attention to this human suffering is not anti-Semitic or necessarily anti-Israel. Judaism does not rejoice in or glorify the deaths of our enemies, let alone non-combatants, even if inflicted in a just war. But the most revealing part of the letter was the signatories' responses as to why they signed it. Over and over again, they mentioned the URJ's complicity in genocide, ethnic cleansing, the oppression of the Palestinian people, and Israeli apartheid and colonialism. They expressed no doubts, no complexities, and no qualms. The righteousness of their position was self-evident to them, as was the moral culpability of anyone who disagrees. They accused the Reform movement of violating the principle of tikkun olam, repair of the world, that we, the rabbis and educators and cantors, supposedly taught them in our synagogues, schools, youth groups, and camps. They expressed no Jewish warmth, nary a word of sympathy for Israelis, or compassion for the murdered, brutalized, sexually assaulted, and kidnapped of our own people. There was no gratitude or grief for Israeli soldiers their age who laid down their lives protecting the people of Israel. It is as if all Jewish solidarity, empathy, responsibility, and mutuality were stripped from these young Jews, and according to them, it was we, Reformed clergy and educators, who taught them these values. We thought that we were sensitizing young Jews to the Jewish obligation of social repair. Letaken olam b'malchut Shaddai. We thought we were conveying the principle of Jewish universalism. V'nivrechu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves through you. We thought we were teaching gmilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness. We thought we were instilling our yearnings for peace and justice and righteousness and truth. Shalom, tzedek, mishpat, emet. We thought we were emphasizing the equal dignity of all human beings, each created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. But for many of our youngsters, the Jewish spirit was dribbling away while we thought we were passing it on. Had we known that 5 years, 10 years after B'nai Mitzvah, some of our own graduates would be leading anti-Zionist campus protests in the name of the very Jewish values they said they learned from us. Now, looking back, would we have changed anything in our curricula and other identity-building efforts? Did we intend for our young people to lead anti-Zionist Passover Seders at university encampments in so-called liberated zones, liberated from Zionists? Had we known, would we have focused more on Ahavat Yisrael, love, commitment, and responsibility for the Jewish people, the place where everything Jewish starts, and without which nothing Jewish can be fully understood? Sadly, I think that many of the anti-Zionist Gen Z Jews are lost to us, at least for the foreseeable future. I say this with great pain, and I hope I'm mistaken. Personally, I welcome any Jew, whatever are their views, to come and speak with me. I would love for a young activist to sit me down and tell me all the reasons they think I'm wrong and to give me an opportunity to respond. I do not cancel any Jew We welcome all Jews for membership here in this synagogue. No one inquires about their beliefs or practices. But I fear that many of the anti-Zionist Gen Zs will not return in the coming years. Part of their critique is against the Jewish establishment, especially synagogues and rabbis, who they feel are collaborating with immorality. But whether or not they return to us in the short or long term, it is not too late for the generations to come. Do we have a plan for them? Does the current crisis change our assumptions in any way? How do we want young Jews to turn out in 5, 10, 20 years? Anti-Zionist congregants and leaders of Reform synagogues? Or proud Jews who, in the true liberal spirit, have strong and diverse opinions about everything, including Israel, but who are committed to the Jewish people and to the Jewish state? We can forge a new path. We have much to work with. Along with the alienation of what is still a small part of the Jewish community, we are also seeing a strong resurgence of Jewish interest, affiliation, and identification. And within Gen Z, we have some of the most charismatic, dynamic, brilliant young Jews. Crises often bring forth attributes we never knew we had. History creates great people and great leaders. We have some awe-inspiring young Jews. We will meet several of them today and tomorrow. So poised, so articulate, so courageous, compelling, and captivating that one wonders who produced such people and how. Why did we not pay enough attention to them before? In their hands lay the future of American Jewish life. What did they receive that others did not? That is the question before us at the dawn of this new Jewish age. How are our schools, camps, and youth groups going to change? What Jewish values will we be emphasizing moving forward? 2, speaking of the next generation of Jewish leaders, are we comfortable with the ordination of anti-Zionist Reform clergy? Of course, we must define what we mean by Zionism. And personally, I believe we should construct the biggest, most open tent we can. We're pluralists. We cannot sustain a large, diverse movement without ensuring expansive space for differing views, opinions, beliefs, and values. But principles require parameters. Beliefs require boundaries. Otherwise, we believe nothing. If we are a Zionist movement, especially at a time when Zionism is under such pressure from within and without, is it conceivable that we would be ordaining anti-Zionists to lead our congregations in the future? Is there a future for such a movement? What are the prospects for a community of Jews that distances itself ideologically and practically from the vast majority of the world's Jews? And in such periods of hostility, when other liberal seminaries are wavering on their Zionist commitments, should we not place at the center of our ambitions the training of leaders equipped with the deepest possible love for and understanding of Israel, Zionism, and Jewish peoplehood? I'm not opposed to anti-Zionist Jews receiving support from anti-Zionist clergy and educators. If a community wishes to hire such leaders, bless them. But why our movement? Let us leave that to other seminaries. Let us stand for the principles we stated and restated since the mid-20th century. We are a Zionist movement. We are committed to the centrality of Jewish peoplehood. We are theologically, philosophically, and practically devoted to the Jewish state, not uncritically, but unconditionally. Can we not agree that among the central aims and purposes of our seminary is the ordination of clergy dedicated to these principles? Yes. Those who are antagonistic to our values are, of course, entitled to their views. But aren't we also entitled to set the parameters of our beliefs for our movement? If we can agree on these basics, we can debate the best methods to achieve our objectives. If we cannot agree on the fundamental principles, I fear for the well-being of North American Jewry. Those who abandon Jewish peoplehood, whether by word, by deed, or neglect, those who turn their backs on Israel, the most eloquent expression of Jewish peoplehood in our times, will be as leaves falling from the tree of Jewish life. For what are the prospects of the continuity of the people if the people is not committed to its own distinctive continuity and does not even agree philosophically that it is a legitimate objective and a social good? Is it possible to sustain the Jewish people without being committed to the Jewish people? Can Judaism exist without Jews? 3, what should be our response when the social justice movements we have been part of and helped found, fund, and lead clash with core Jewish values? How should we respond when the price of admission to groups addressing climate change, female empowerment, racial disparity, minority rights, poverty, interfaith relations, when their policy is for Jews to check their Zionism at the door, discarding our own identity and abandoning our own people? How should we respond to the passionate loathing and seething hatreds of Israel from some of our partners? Should we continue working with them for the greater good? Should we succumb to their demands? Should we leave and try and find other partners? Have we asked our partners the most basic questions? What business do progressives have supporting those who oppress women, gays, minorities, and Christians? Why do so many young Americans support Hamas, which is opposed to everything we in the West believe? Why do young adults especially, who are so acutely sensitive to the assignment of moral accountability, fail to assign moral agency to the Palestinians? Why treat them as passive victims bearing no political or moral responsibility for their actions? How to explain the failure of university administrators to enforce their own policies? Is it just the uneven quality of leadership? Or does the willingness to tolerate anti-Jewish and anti-Israel environments on their campuses in violation of their own codes of behavior Is it a window into the mindset of administrators, DEI functionaries, and faculty members? Was the refusal of so many universities to issue any moral guidance on Hamas's brutality simply a localized failure of leadership on the part of individual presidents and administrations? Or does it point to deeper failings of higher education? Why couldn't they find the simple human compassion to identify with Israeli victims, let alone condemn the perpetrators even before Israel responded militarily? Is there a moral rot at the very core of these institutions that have been entrusted by us to teach and preserve Western liberalism? When we established the Religious Action Center in 1962, within a short period of time, we became participants in and leaders of the struggle for civil rights. Parts of the two great legislative acts that helped define the 60s, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, were drafted in the conference room of the Religious Action Center. I heard this story many times from my father. Martin Luther King and a multitude of civil rights leaders were frequent visitors to the RAC. They were invited to use the conference room as a sort of home away from home. They set up offices in the heart of Reform Judaism whenever they were in Washington. The RAC was founded to advance the liberal values of justice, inclusivity, tolerance, respect, human dignity, love, unity, and peace. It sought to make our movement actors rather than mere observers in the great civil rights struggles of our times. Its founding vision included this statement: shall we continue to debate a guide for ritual observance without at the same time debating guides for moral behavior? Shall our congregations devote their energies to increasing membership dues and not to increasing concern for world peace? Shall we, who bitterly resented the silence of most of the churches of Nazi Germany, ourselves remain silent in the face of injustice and inequity in our society? And along with that universal vision, the Religious Action Center also clarified that Jewish universalism is grounded in Jewish particularism. We Jews have earned the right to define ourselves, the RAC proclaimed. We define ourselves as a people. The Jewish people has in turn created a Jewish state. The state is our symbol of hope, especially after the Six-Day War. The RAC became our most vocal and insistent advocate for Zionism in the social justice community, at a time when, especially after the Six-Day War, our partners abandoned Israel. Because like today, they thought that Jewish particularism is backward, unbecoming, unchristian of us, and that Zionism was too ethnic and parochial for modern liberal Jews. Zionism is social justice, the RAC responded. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue, and everybody forgets the second part of the verse. Leman tichyeh, v'yarashta et haaretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach. Justice, justice shall you pursue so that you may live and inherit the land that God has granted you. From the beginning, the RAC insisted that Judaism's universal aspirations emerged from and are a result of Jewish particularism, a function of Jewish peoplehood, not its negation. For us Jews, wrote Abraham Joshua Heschel, there can be no fellowship with God without the fellowship with the people Israel. Abandoning Israel, we desert God. Will we allow others to lecture us about Jewish values? They think that it's their place to teach us what we don't know about Judaism? How should we respond to the very people who react so forcefully to anyone who is not part of their minority group, voicing opinions about the lived experiences of such minorities, but who allow themselves to define for Jews what constitutes good Judaism and bad Judaism, good Jews and bad Jews, or as Congresswoman Omar said, pro-genocide and anti-genocide Jews? Jews get to define Judaism. Others get to decide whether they accept us as we see ourselves. In this week's Torah portion, we read, Im bechukotai telechu ve'et mitzvotai tishmoru. If you walk in my ways and safeguard my commandments, Va'eshbor motot ulchem ve'olech etchem komemiyut. I will break the bars of your yoke and lead you to komemiyut. That word, komemiyut, is one of my favorite Hebrew words. Whenever I read it or hear it, strong emotions flow through me. It's impossible to fully translate. First, because it's mentioned only once in the Bible, in our parsha of the week. And second, any translation will inevitably miss its full meaning. Komemiyut implies upright, proud, having dignity. In the context of the verse in Leviticus, it implies possessing the attributes of those freed from oppression and slavery. Now think of the imagery. I will break the bars of your yoke. That is, those heavy planks placed on beasts of burden that bend them to our will. Once removed from the slave, the effect is to release the human being previously bent over in submission, to stand upright, proud, and with a sense of self-esteem. Mentioned in the context of national liberation, komemiyut implies the restoration of collective Jewish dignity through liberation and self-determination. The verse from this week's parsha is the source of one of our most moving daily prayers. V'ahavienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot ha'aretz v'tolichenu komemiyut le'artzenu. Bring us home in peace, O God, from the four corners of the earth. V'tolichenu komemiyut. And guide us. Be by our side as we walk upright, free, with dignity to our land. We are blessed to live in this era of the liberation of the Jews. For millennia, we yearned, prayed, and died for the right to live free in our own land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. Freedom is hard, especially for a people deprived of sovereignty for 2,000 years. We have learned that exercising Jewish power is fraught with ethical and moral dilemmas. But Jewish history has proven conclusively that it is better for Jews to have the power to defend ourselves while struggling with its moral use than to be powerless and at the mercy of the dark lords. October 7 revealed to us what our enemies wish to do on a grand scale, irrespective of our personal beliefs, if they ever acquire the power to execute their murderous aims. Had even the most fervent American peace activist found themselves in one of those border communities on that awful day, they too would have been slaughtered in their beds, brutalized and sexually assaulted in the fields, or viciously taken hostage. No one would have asked their views. For the first time in 2 millennia, we are free. God has broken the bar of our yoke and granted us komemiut, national dignity. Let us brace ourselves to our duties and so bear ourselves as to prove worthy of this great and awesome gift. Baruch atah Adonai habocher be'amo Yisrael be'ahava. Praised are you, O God, who has chosen your people Israel in love.
I'd like to ask everyone to please remain in your seats as we quickly transition to our first plenum of the conference. At this time, members of our first plenum on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on the college campus, please ascend the bima and take a seat.
Sounds good. So I'm going to start first and then, perfect, awesome, great. Is it there? Perfect. Good morning. Invite, as we get started, just to take a moment and stretch your shoulders, take a deep breath. Look to the left of you and the right of you, see the person you remember from camp or college or some other conference and smile at them. Welcome to our first plenum, Anti-Semitism and Anti-Zionism on college campuses. My name is Rabbi Melissa Simon, and I am the Director of Israel Education for Hillel International, working with the Center for Jewish and Israel Education. I'm a Reform rabbi who spent the last 10 years working with the Hillel movement at UNC Chapel Hill and Muhlenberg College. In my work, I've brought over 200 college students to Israel, and in my current position, we will bring 100 Hillel professionals to Israel between January, March, and July of this year to help them better understand a post-October 7th Israel. The core of my work with Hillel International is training Hillel professionals to be stronger Israel educators so that they can impact the estimated 400,000 Jewish college students in North America. Hillel is the largest Jewish organization in the US and the world, with a presence on more than 700 campuses in North America. And our vision, our core vision of our work, is that we envision a world where every student is inspired to make an enduring commitment to Jewish life, learning, and Israel. In our plenum this morning, we'll have 3 different parts. I'll open with some framing about life on campus for Jewish college students. Each of our speakers will offer a short opening remark, And then we'll have time for Q&A, first with prepared questions, and then a more open Q&A with the provided note cards that you heard about earlier. Like all of us, Jewish students on college campuses woke up on Saturday, October 7th, to learn of the most violent, depraved, and murderous acts against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Even in those first hours, during which the extent of Hamas's atrocities were still becoming known, students logged onto social media and saw fellow students excusing and celebrating the acts. Then, as students left their dorm rooms to attend vigils for the slaughtered and those taken hostage, their mourning and their grief were interrupted by pro-Hamas protests on campus and in nearby communities, including unlawful disruptions, destruction of property, vandalism, and violence. And through all of this, students were met with a baffling silence and indifference from many whom we, expected to show empathy and to speak on their behalf, including faculty and administrators. Over the last 8 months, as the war with Hamas and the violence in Israel has continued on a daily basis, these protests have grown and the alarming silences have persisted. Encampments marred the last weeks of the semester, and disruptions during graduation celebrations shifted the attention from the graduates. Campus Hillels, which serve as a lifeline for Jewish students, have been targeted by anti-Israel protesters who have called for the university to disaffiliate with the organizations that focus on Jewish life because of their commitment to Israel. It's important to note that not all criticism of Israel or the actions of the Israeli government or its military is anti-Semitic. But as Natan Sharansky taught, it does cross the line with 3 Ds: delegitimization, demonization, and double standards. Hillel values the importance of free speech and seeks to ensure that all students are able to speak and protest, as long as those activities do not interfere with the rights of others. We see that the situation on campus creates a hostile environment for Jewish students and often violates, as we heard from Rabbi Hirsch, campus-wide policies. Universities have an obligation to enforce its time, place, and manner regulations on protests, demonstrations, and freedom of speech. Such speech activities cannot impede the university's academic mission or interfere with the rights of any members of the campus community to speak, listen, teach, research, and learn. This means adhering to campus codes of conduct, which designate specific locations for campus protests. It means that professors cannot require students to attend their classes in encampments. There is no justification for universities' failures to enforce codes of conduct in a manner that effectively protects Jewish students from hostile environments in violation of federal civil rights law. Anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism now defines the daily experience for far too many Jewish students. Many are afraid to be Jewishly visible, afraid of how faculty will treat them, afraid of physical assault, afraid of demonstrations turning violent. This understandable fear is now shaping and disrupting the everyday experience of a majority of Jewish students. But before I conclude my opening remarks, I also want to lift up the Jewish joy that has been alongside too much oi. This has been a record-setting year for Hillel in terms of the number of students who are participating in our programs, the most ever in our organization's 100-year history. In the face of isolation, indifference, and disinformation, Jewish students are being Jewish students. We'll mark about 180,000 students participating in programs and events with us this year, an increase of more than 20,000 students. Israel engagement is a big part of that growth. We're on track to have over 40,000 students participate in Israel programming with Hillel this year, a 16% increase compared to last year. 1,000 students attended Hillel International's Israel Summit in Atlanta, learning in dynamic sessions, building their networks, and dancing the night away with Netta Barzilai. Thousands of students engaged in deep Israel learning about a complex and nuanced Israel through our Kol Yisrael cohort learning programs. And while the number is down significantly, We estimate about 9,000 Jewish young people will travel to Israel this summer on birthright trips. Across North America, we are working to foster a love of being Jewish and a feeling of connection to Israel for our students. And we are blessed this morning to be joined by three incredible speakers who will share their perspectives on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on college campuses. I'll introduce them in the order that they'll speak. Eden Yadegar is a rising senior at Columbia University in the joint program with the Jewish Theological Seminary. She's the president of Students Supporting Israel, an engagement fellow with Columbia Barnard Hillel. Eden has spoken widely about the experiences of Jewish college students on campus in general and at Columbia specifically. Rabbi David Wolpe has been a visiting scholar at the Harvard Divinity School, and he publicly resigned from Harvard's Anti-Semitism Advisory Group in December. He is the Anti-Defamation League's first rabbinic fellow and the Max Webb Rabbi Emeritus of Sinai Temple of Los Angeles. Last, Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Each of our presenters will make a brief presentation here from the Bima, and then we'll sit at these seats and gather for a series of questions. Eden.
Thank you so much to Rabbi Tracy and everyone here at the synagogue that made this conference and this conversation in particular happen at a time arguably more important than ever. My name is Eden Yadegar. I'm a rising senior at Columbia University in the joint program with the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I respectively study Middle East studies, political science, and modern Jewish studies. When I used to tell people that I was a Columbia student, and a Jewish Zionist Middle East studies major, no less, they would commend me. Now, when I tell people that I am a Columbia student, I can see the horror and the heartbreak in their eyes. And rightfully so. Columbia University has fallen from grace. University leadership has proved to us day after day that they couldn't care less about us, their Jewish students, and that they cannot and will not protect us. At Columbia, Jewish students have been spit on for speaking Hebrew, shoved and hit with sticks, rocks, and fists, singled out in classes by professors, forced out of social clubs, blocked by peers and professors from entering certain parts of campus, and told to go back to Poland. This year, I lost countless friends who simply stopped speaking to me because of my support for the Jewish people and our homeland in our darkest hour, without engaging in so much as a conversation with me before unfollowing me on social media. I skipped too many classes to plan vigils, rallies, and educational speaker events. The existential fight for Jewish survival on campus was and is all-consuming. I have been yelled at on campus multiple times, told by my peers that I am a disgusting colonizer and that I should be ashamed of myself. It is undeniable how normalized and ubiquitous anti-Semitism has become at Columbia. And while those experiences have colored this academic year for all of us, they have been overshadowed by something far more important: Jewish unity and Jewish pride. Because while I have been isolated, harassed, and forced to disregard my schoolwork in many instances, I have never been more proud to be a Jew, and I have never felt more loved, supported, and inspired by the Jewish community at Columbia and across the globe. I want to be abundantly clear, though, that my Jewish pride is not inspired by anti-Semites. I am deeply connected to my Jewish identity, heritage, history, and homeland because of my community. I grew up attending Wilshire Boulevard Temple, including its K-6 day school and summer camp. It was there that I learned to be a proud Jew means not only to stand tall in the face of those that despise us, but to be proud and connect to our Jewish identities even when there is no one telling us not to. It is to be unconditionally and unabashedly Jewish, no matter what and no matter where. Unfortunately, this year has offered little respite or refuge from those that wish to see us dead, off campus, or abandon a fundamental part of our Jewishness, are Zionism. In response, though, I have seen the Jewish community at Columbia come together in ways I truthfully did not think possible. I have seen my peers take ownership of their Jewish identities in ways far more powerful than any anti-Jewish protest or academic lecture could ever seek to demonize us for it. In fact, nearly 700 and counting of my Jewish peers signed a letter that I had the privilege of co-authoring with 3 of my peers and friends, expressing exactly that. We refuse to allow anyone to hate us for being Jewish more than we love it. We refuse to allow others to define our Judaism for us. And I'm going to read that letter now, titled In Our Name. To the Columbia community, over the last 6 months, many have spoken in our name. Some are well-meaning alumni or non-affiliates who show up to wave the Israeli flag outside of Columbia's gates. Some are politicians looking to use our experiences to foment America's culture war. Most notably, some are our Jewish peers who tokenize themselves by claiming to represent real Jewish values, an attempt to delegitimize our lived experiences of anti-Semitism. We are here, writing to you as Jewish students at Columbia University, who are connected to our community and deeply engaged with our culture and history. We would like to speak in our name. Many of us sit next to you in class. We are your lab partners, study buddies, your peers, and your friends. We partake in the same student government, the same clubs, Greek life, volunteer organizations, and sports teams as you. Most of us did not choose to become political activists. We do not bang on drums or chant catchy slogans. We are average students, just trying to make it through finals, much like the rest of you. Those who demonize us under the cloak of anti-Zionism forced us into our activism and forced us to publicly defend our Jewish identities. We proudly believe in the Jewish people's right to self-determination in our historic homeland as a fundamental tenet of our Jewish identity. Contrary to what many have tried to sell you, no, Judaism cannot be separated from Israel. Zionism is, simply put, the manifestation of that belief. Our religious texts are replete with references to Israel, Zion, and Jerusalem. The land of Israel is filled with archaeological remnants of a Jewish presence spanning centuries. Yet despite generations of living in exile and diaspora across the globe, the Jewish people never cease dreaming of returning to our homeland, Judea, the very place from which we derive our name, Jews. Indeed, just a few weeks ago, we all closed our Passover Seders with the proclamation, "Next year in Jerusalem." Many of us are not religiously observant, yet Zionism remains a pillar of our Jewish identities. We have been kicked out of Russia, Libya, Ethiopia, Yemen, Afghanistan, Poland, Egypt, Algeria, Germany, Iran, and the list goes on. We connect to Israel not only as our ancestral homeland, but as the only place in the modern world where Jews can safely take ownership of our own destiny. Our experiences at Columbia in the last 6 months are a poignant reminder of just that. We were raised on stories of our grandparents in concentration camps, gas chambers, and ethnic cleansing. The essence of Hitler's anti-Semitism was the very fact that we were not European enough, that Jews were threats to the superior Aryan race. This ideology ultimately left 6 million of our own in ashes. The evil irony of today's anti-Semitism is a twisted reversal of our Holocaust legacy. Protesters on campus have dehumanized us, imposing upon us the characterization of white colonizer. We have been told that we are, quote, the oppressors of all brown people, and that, quote, the Holocaust wasn't special. Students at Columbia have chanted, "We don't want no Zionists here," alongside death to the Zionist state and to go back to Poland, where our ancestors lie in mass graves. This sick distortion illuminates the nature of anti-Semitism. In every generation, the Jewish people are blamed and scapegoated as responsible for the societal evil of the time. In Iran and in the Arab world, we endured state-sponsored violence and were ultimately ethnically cleansed for our presumed ties to the Zionist entity. In Russia, we endured state-sponsored violence and were massacred for being capitalists. In Europe, we were the victims of genocide because we were communists and not European enough. And today, we face the accusation of being too European, painted as society's worst evils, colonizers and oppressors. We are targeted for our belief that Israel, our ancestral and religious homeland, has a right to exist. We are targeted by those that misuse the word Zionist as a sanitized slur for Jew, synonymous with racist, oppressive, or genocidal. We know all too well that anti-Semitism is shape-shifting. We are proud of Israel. The only democracy in the Middle East, Israel is home to millions of Mizrahi Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, and Ethiopian Jews, as well as millions of Arab Israelis, over 1 million Muslims, and hundreds of thousands of Christians and Druze. Israel is nothing short of a miracle for the Jewish people and for the Middle East more broadly. Our love for Israel does not necessitate blind political conformity. It is quite the opposite. For many of us, our deep love and commitment to Israel pushes us to object when its government acts in ways we find problematic. Israeli political disagreement is an inherently Zionist activity. Look no further than the protests against Netanyahu's judicial reforms, from New York to Tel Aviv, to understand what it means to fight for an Israel that we imagine. All it takes are a couple of coffee chats with us to realize that our visions for Israel differ dramatically from one another. Yet we all come from a place of love and an aspiration for a better future for both Israelis and Palestinians. If the last 6 months on campus have taught us anything, it is that a large and vocal population of the Columbia community does not understand the meaning of Zionism and consequently does not understand the essence of the Jewish people. Yet despite the fact that we have been calling out the anti-Semitism we've been experiencing for months, our concerns have been brushed off and invalidated. So here we are to remind you. We sounded the alarm on October 12th, when many protested against Israel while our friends' and families' dead bodies were still warm. We recoiled when people screamed, "Resist by any means necessary," telling us that we are, quote, all inbred and that we, quote, have no culture. We shuddered when activists held up a sign telling Jewish students that they were Hamas's next targets and shook our heads in disbelief when social media users told us that we were lying. We ultimately were not surprised when a leader of the Columbia University apartheid divest encampment said publicly and proudly that, quote, Zionists don't deserve to live, and that we're lucky they are, quote, not just going out and murdering Zionists. We felt helpless when we watched students and faculty physically block Jewish students from entering parts of campus that we share, or even when they turn their faces away in silence. The silence is familiar. We will never forget. But one thing is for sure, we will not stop standing up for ourselves. We are proud to be Jews and we are proud to be Zionists. We came to Columbia because we wanted to expand our minds and engage in complex conversations. While campus may be riddled with hateful rhetoric and simplistic binaries right now, it is never too late to start repairing the fractures and begin developing meaningful relationships across political and religious divides. Our tradition tells us, love peace and pursue peace. We hope that you will join us in earnestly pursuing peace, truth, and empathy. Together, we can repair our campus. You never know how strong a tea bag is until it is in hot water. The Jewish community at Columbia remains resilient, proud, and united in the face of bigotry, bullying, and harassment espoused by our peers and professors and tolerated by our university leaders. But the future of Jews at Columbia, at universities across the country, and arguably of American Jewry, depends on the continued pride and resilience of Jewish youth everywhere. I want to end with a message from Israeli political activist Natan Sharansky's op-ed in Tablet magazine about this letter. Dear Jewish students of America, today you are on the front line. The future of American Jewry, and maybe even America itself, stands in your hands. Be brave. Thank you.
How about that? By the way, she comes from a wonderful family, unsurprising. Taking her picture all the time, so you can applaud her family as well. Why not? About 30 years ago, when I was teaching at the seminary and living in Hackensack, the Bergen County rabbis asked if Larry Kushner and I would teach a seminar for the rabbis, and we said, sure, we'd be happy to, and then we forgot about it. And the day before, they said, what's the title of your seminar? And I called Larry and I said, we never talked about this. We need a title, and we need it right now. And Larry said, don't worry. I have a title that always works. I said, okay, what is it? He said, Judaism at the Crossroads. So here we are again, at the crossroads. When I retired from my synagogue last June, it was not easy to say that I was leaving. As Rabbi Hirsch will find out one day, but not for many, many, many years. But it was made much easier by my saying, well, look, I'm going to be a visiting scholar at Harvard. And people said, oh, well, Harvard. Then I came back to my synagogue a month later, and they went, oi, Harvard. And the truth is that the loss of esteem, the mess that was made of campuses, the lack of courage, the presence of ugliness and hatred and cowardice was almost unimaginable before. But not totally unimaginable. This is, after all, a development of many years, and I remember before October 7th, my very first religious experience at the Divinity School. Each year they build a little sukkah. And they had the sukkah in the middle of the Divinity School, and they were going to have one ceremony. So I thought, I'll go to the ceremony. There was no lulav, there was no etrog, there were no Hebrew blessings, but okay. The person who was leading the ceremony, who was a student, started off as follows. This sukkah is a safe space for anti-Zionists, non-Zionists, and those of you that are struggling to overcome your Zionism. And I thought, not for me, right? Not a safe space for me, but that's why I was not so surprised at the presence of Jews at the encampments, because I had already seen it. And I think that it is important at the outset to say, apart from the Jewish students, although including the Jewish students, we, as I want to call us wiser heads, have to be really careful not to attribute to anti-Semitism that which is ignorance. And you should always go for ignorance rather than malice, because most of the students at those encampments had no idea what they were saying. I'm sure you saw that article in the Wall Street Journal, which river and which sea. They had no, I don't know, the Erie Canal, maybe the Great Lakes. They had no idea. And that's not surprising, since after all, as Jews, we think everybody knows everything about Israel, but how much do you know about Nagorno-Karabakh? Or about the situation in Kashmir? All they know is that this is the cause, and that their peers are all gathered around this cause, and you tend to do what your peers do, not necessarily what your parents say. We know this, evolutionarily, sociologically. Judith Rich Harris wrote a book about this many years ago called The Nurture Assumption, in which she pointed out the children of immigrants learn English from their parents, but they speak without an accent. Because you're supposed to be like your peers, and if all your peers are there chanting genocide,
The default is you chant genocide. Now, we also know that there were a core of students and a little bit larger than a core of faculty that actually knew what they were talking about. And here, I'm not going to regale you with all the incidents at Harvard, although there were many, and I could keep you here most of the day. But it is nonetheless important to distinguish between criticism of Israel and the denial of Israel to exist and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And I know everybody has their own read. I want to say something. After having spoken to kids at the encampments, which I did, and others, I want to say something about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, which are not identical. But the Venn diagram has a very great overlap. And here is the overlap. It requires two different things. One is, I would say to them always, China, Uyghurs, Sudan, millions of refugees, Syria kills, Assad kills hundreds and thousands of his own people, on and on and on. Why do none of these things exercise you? Sometimes they didn't have an answer. Sometimes they said, well, we're not funding that, which is not always true, but okay. But then I would say to them, are you aware of the fact that Germany started 2 world wars? How come nobody ever said, that's it, we're done with Germany? When the Chinese put Uyghurs into concentration camps, whether we funded it or not, nobody says that's it for China. I've been to Rwanda, where one half of the population literally took to clubbing the other half of the population in the streets, and yet no one in the world said, you know what, that's it, no more Rwanda. The only state in the world, the only one in which people call for its elimination is Israel. Now, if it were not for the fact that Israel also happens to be the only state that is occupied by a people who have a millennial history of prejudice against them, then you might say it's coincidence. But in a line that resonates as painful as it is, Eliezer Berkovitz once pointed out, he said, it may not be true that all the Nazis were Christians, but it is true that they were all the children of Christians. The religious prejudices, East and West, especially West, Muslim and Christian, especially, sadly, Christian, carry cultural resonances of which children and grandchildren are not aware. And what we were hearing on campus was something that was very new, but also very old. And anybody who has a Jewish ear for the ages heard medieval speak. And that was true for the faculty as well as for the students. What you heard was a modern version of the blood libel, no less, and it was just put into different terms about how, after all, those Israelis love to kill Palestinian children. My colleague, whom many of you know, whom I treasure so much, Dara Horn, has this wonderful distinction between Purim anti-Semitism and Hanukkah anti-Semitism. Purim anti-Semitism is Haman anti-Semitism, Hitler anti-Semitism, let's kill all the Jews. But Hanukkah anti-Semitism isn't that. It is, you just have to be Greek. That is, you're okay as long as you aren't what you are. Then we will accept you. And I saw in these encampments all the victims of Hanukkah anti-Semitism. And I wanted to say to them, literally, in that condescending tone that older people sometimes take, or I do anyway, I wanted to say to them, my children, it always turns into Purim anti-Semitism. It never stays as Hanukkah. And unfortunately, that's a lesson that we have to learn again and again. Now, I'm not saying that America is Germany. It's not. But one of the reasons that it's not, and I really try to say this every time I speak about it, is because America, for most of Jewish history, there were French and Jews, Germans and Jews, whatever ethnic group you want to pick, but there aren't Americans and Jews. There are lots of different groups, lots of different groups. And therefore, one thing that Jews have to remember is we are much better at identifying enemies than embracing friends. And one of the things the Jewish community needs to be doing so much more vigorously than we are, and for this I applaud both my boss and colleague Jonathan Greenblatt, is building coalitions with other groups. And you don't have to agree with everything they say or everything they do. But we need friends. And also, we are good friends. And we shouldn't forget that. In America, we are not alone. We care about other kinds of discrimination, too. I mean, there's an Islamophobia commission at all these colleges, too, although I have to say, with all due respect to the reality of Islamophobia, I saw a lot of kippot taken off and a lot of Jewish stars hidden, and all I saw were everybody all of a sudden wearing keffiyehs. So it didn't seem to me at Harvard like that was really the problem that we had to worry about. But nonetheless, I think it is important that we recognize that we have to give of ourselves to others, and yet that insistence on universality, and this is the real message, should not erase what those students were really missing, which is Ahavat Yisrael. It isn't so much love of Israel that they were missing, it's love of Israel. It is the sense that to love your own family is a prejudice and not a virtue. It is the recognition that the people who are closest to you should be closest to you, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is not a violation of human nature. That is the way of human nature. And that, in fact, the more particular you are, the more universalistic you can be. When the United Nations, which is in theory the most universal institution in the world, wants to express itself universally, what does it do? It takes a quote from Isaiah. Lo yisa goy el goy cherev lo yilmadu od milchama. And that's what it puts in the United Nations, that nation shall not lift up sword against nation. They turn to Jewish particularism when they want to express universalism. Cynthia Ozick has this wonderful phrase. She says, look at the shofar. It has a narrow end and a broad end. If you start off blowing in the broad end, you get nothing. You start off blowing in the narrow end, you get a sound everyone can hear. We have to teach our children the preciousness of the narrow end. How much loving other Jews is a good thing for the world, not only for the Jewish people. And how again and again and again it has proved valuable. Natan Sharansky makes this point about the Soviet Union. He says there were two kinds of Jews in the Soviet Union. There were the universalists. They became the communists. They helped enslave the Soviet Union. And then there were the Jews. They were the refuseniks. They were the particularists. And they helped liberate the Soviet Union. We really do need to teach our children that loving people in your family is a good thing and that it will help the world. I could go on, obviously, but I'm not going to. I do know that part of it inevitably is our fault. Sometimes I think we probably gave too rosy a picture and not a critical enough picture of our own community. And as Sartre has this wonderful line in the words, he says, like all dreamers, I confuse disillusion with truth. Some of our children are disillusioned and they believe that's the truth, but as they get older, I am hopeful they will be re-enchanted and realize that cynicism and disillusion are not truth. They're just what young people take as truth. But I want to finish with two words of hope. First of all, a few months ago, I was at this conference in Florida, the BBYO conference, with 4,000 Jewish teens. Maybe some of your kids were there or grandkids were there. And I was on a panel, and at the end of the panel, there were 4 of us. They said, "What gives you hope?" And I was going to say, 4,000 Jewish teens. It was easy. Unfortunately, I was the 4th person on the panel. The first 3 said 4,000 Jewish teens, and I thought, David, come up with something different. And I had a havraka, like a flash. And I said, I'll tell you what gives me hope. I'm in conversation with my great-great-great-great-grandfather. And I say to him, you know, there are anti-Semites at Harvard. And he says to me, there are Jews at Harvard? I say to him, yeah, but they hate Israel. And he says, there's an Israel? And that's part of what we have to realize too. Yeah, we're at the crossroads again, but our ancestors would dream of having the problems we have. And that doesn't mean they're not problems, and it doesn't mean that we don't have to address them, and it doesn't mean that it's not crucial, and it doesn't mean that our future in different ways isn't imperiled. All that may be true, but boy, look at where we were and look at where we are. And so I want to turn, as Rabbi Hirsch did in his stellar talk, to this week's Parsha, Bechukotai, which, as you know, begins with that 2-letter word, im, if. Im bechukotai teleku. And hundreds of years ago, the Mincha Belula noticed something amazing about im, Aleph Mem. He said, you know, all of the liberation from Egypt depended on that word. Aleph stands for Aharon, Mem stands for Moshe. It was all about an im. He said, but that wasn't the only time. Our salvation in the time of Purim depended on an im. Aleph stands for Esther, Mem for Mordechai. But wait, he's not done. He said, and most important, the future liberation depends on it too. Aleph stands for Eliyahu, and Mem stands for Mashiach. In other words, whether we succeed or not, yes, in part depends on the world, but ultimately it's im bechukotai telechu. It depends on us. It depends on the faith that you have in our history, in our future, in God, and in yourself. Im, if. We can do it. Thank you.
Things you don't do. You definitely don't walk up to the bima after Rabbi David Wolpe, and you certainly don't walk up to the bima in Rabbi Hirsch's shul, in between the most brave and courageous young woman I have seen in such a long time. Really, there's not a lot left to say. But I'm a Jewish nonprofit CEO, so that's certainly not going to stop me. But really, I am just so in awe of Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Wolpe, and Eden. And, it gives me tremendous hope to have clergy and to have crusaders like this who really represent the best of our tradition, the best of our people. And we need that now more than ever. As the head of the ADL, an organization that was founded 110 years ago, my focus is on stopping the defamation of the Jewish people and securing justice and fair treatment to all. And we are an organization that literally, for more than a century, has been at the front line of fighting, not just anti-Semitism, but as David alluded to, racism and bigotry of all forms. And these are difficult times, and they're difficult times in many ways, but not the least of which, and what we're here to talk about today, is not the surge of anti-Semitism, but the tsunami of anti-Semitism. And when I say tsunami, I use that term because I don't have another. I don't have another phenomenon that I can speak to that is so truly global, planetary in scope. Because what's happening here is not unique. You know, last year the ADL created something called the J7. Like the G7 is the largest economies in the world, the J7 is the largest Jewish communities in the world in diaspora. So, the heads of the communities from the United States, Canada, Argentina, the UK, France, Germany, and Australia, we speak every week. Every week. And I can tell you what we are seeing here on our campuses, what we are seeing here against our businesses, what we are seeing here against our artists and writers, what we are seeing here in public spaces. They are happening in Australia, in Canada, in London, Paris, Berlin, and far more places. This is a planetary crisis, not one just confined to this country. But the data in this country is staggering, and many of you have heard ADL's numbers before, but just to put this into context, last year was not just the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents we've tracked in 45 years, it was the fourth time in 5 years that we've broken a new record. The number of anti-Jewish acts of harassment, vandalism, and violence that we tracked in 2023 was nearly 900% greater than a decade earlier. We are indeed like frogs in the boiling water. And the stories that I've heard in the last 5 months of 2024 are staggering. A friend recommended that I look at that book, The Pity of It All, about the unraveling of German Jewry. And I think about the phrase, it's Lenin's quote, that there are decades when nothing happens and days when decades happen. We are living through those days. Because I have talked to the Jewish academics who've been thrown off of research projects without explanation. I've talked to, just the other day, the novelist, the Jewish novelist who was told there's not a single bookstore on the island of Manhattan that would host her for a book signing. Not one. I've been told about the streaming platforms that are actively buying content, but nothing from Israel. They'll take the meeting, they'll shake your hand, and then there is no return call. Or just today, there was a story in the press in Florida about a lawsuit being brought against the municipality for buying Israel bonds. And these incidents come against the backdrop of changing attitudes. We've been tracking attitudes at the ADL, measuring how the general population feels about the Jewish community since 1964. And what I'll tell you in brief is that in the last 5 years, intense anti-Semitic attitudes in this country have more than doubled. 24% of the population expresses an intense hostility toward Jews. That, my friends, is a lot of people. And what I'll say is that as this is happening and we see these pictures, this film of the encampments at these campuses, and by the way, I've been to many of them, Columbia, Harvard, Penn, USC, and more in the last several, 5-6 weeks. There is some good news. These encampments have sort of captured the public imagination, but do you know how many kids are actually there? Some 2,500 people reportedly have been arrested around the country. Let's put aside the fact that nearly half of them are not students. You can do the math, 2,500-ish people, There are 18.5 million college students in America, folks. So we're talking about something like 1/100th of 1%. And many of you saw the televoting around the Eurovision contest just a few weeks back when the amazing Eden Golan, she basically won the popular vote. So this is a small number of people who are really manipulating public opinion in ways that I think are very damaging to all of us. But they are, because they're poisoning the climate and creating the kind of conditions in which people like Eden, or two of my 3 kids who are in college today, both have had experiences that I'm not going to share but are pretty terrible. And this isn't, again, just happening here. And it isn't just happening in diaspora. I got back from Israel late last night. I was there for about a week, meeting with everyone, from President Herzog to people in the arts and in business and in academia. And a few takeaways from that trip, I will tell you, the emotionalism is so high. I had the privilege, the honor of speaking at Hostage Square on Saturday night. Thousands upon thousands of Israelis come out every Saturday night. How many of you have been to Israel since 10/7? Raise your hands. Bravo. All of you should go. Because to see the level of unity in the country around the hostages, to see the number of people who wear this and wear this, to see the posters in the airport at Tel Aviv, when you walk out, you can see not just hostage signs, but the notes that people have written on them. It is inspiring. I also will tell you, while I talk to many Anglos of an older generation, let's say my generation older, who expressed great despair and sadness, I also talk to younger people, Sabras of Israel, like my family there, and they have nothing but determination and drive. They are optimistic in ways that give me tremendous hope for the Jewish state. The young generation knows they will get through this. They're determined to get through this because they have nowhere else to go. And then I'll also just note that I spent some time not just in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. I spent almost a day in Rahat, which is the largest Arab Israeli community, largest Arab Israeli city in the country. And let me tell you what the leadership of the town said. We're with you. The Hamas terrorists kidnapped and killed Bedouins and Muslims on that day. We're with you. How many, now this could change today, but how many attacks have we seen inside Israel from the Arab Israeli community? Some plots may have been foiled, but think back a few years ago when the cities like Lod and Ramleh were burning. Today that number would be 0. There's a unity there. I spent another day up in the northern Galilee, in a town called Herfesh, with the Druze community. We are with you, they said. We are with you. And these were great ways, at least for me, to remember that Israel, and I'll tell you something, Rabbi Hirsch, I had a member of the Reform Rabbinate tell me a few years ago that the reason why young people were peeling away from Israel is they didn't like it because it was a, quote, ethno-state. That was the phrase a rabbi used with me. Told me Israel was an ethno-state. I want to bring him to Rahat. I want to bring him to Herfesh. Because Israel is a multi-ethnic, as Eden pointed out, multi-faith, multi-denominational, multi-racial country, like no other in the world. And I was reminded of that this week. So a few other thoughts before we move to the discussion. So I really appreciated that Eden quoted Natan Sharansky, the prisoner of Zion, who is literally one of my personal heroes. And she cited his 3D definition of anti-Semitism. How do you know it's not just anti-Israel, but anti-Semitism? When does it cross the line? He talks about, again, delegitimizing the Jewish state, demonizing the Israeli people, the Jewish people, and holding to double standards. So there's a fourth D. Pay attention when they subvert democracy. Pay attention, because that's what has happened, these activists at these campuses. Using the largesse of the institutions, using the liberties provided by them, exploiting the weakness of so many of these college presidents, whose codes of conduct were never equipped for anything like what they're seeing. And look at members of Congress or elected officials, again, using the tools of our own democracy against us. I also appreciate what a phrase that Rabbi Hirsch used. He said, we need to love Israel unconditionally, but not uncritically. I'm paraphrasing. And it reminds me of something Rabbi Ingber said at the Bima at Romemu a few months ago. He got up to the stage, he got up to the podium, and he said, I love Israel. He said, I love Israel. See that? You're all waiting, right? But if you love a member of your family, you don't condition that love. My kids give me a lot of problems. I never say I love my son, but. I just love my son. So we need a no buts kind of, Ahavat Israel. I also want to comment, because it is the topic of this, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I am on the record and have taken a lot of heat, and I don't really care about the fact that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I have taken that position because it is. Now, I was doing a podcast last week, and the interviewer said, well, philosophically speaking, and I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Philosophically speaking, those are words I never get to use as a CEO of ADL. Because in the world in which I live, the anti-Zionism that Eden told us about, that I've seen, irrespective of the intent of the people, the outcome is the same. Liberated zones, liberated of Jews on their own terms. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism because Zionism is a Jewish value. It didn't start in 1948. It didn't start in 1897 with their Judenstaat or the First World Jewish Congress. Started there. Started 3,500 years ago. Go pick up any Siddur in the back of the room. Find me a page that doesn't reference Zion or Yerushalayim or Yisrael, just like Eden said. We need to remember in the Reformed community that as Tikkun Olam is a Jewish value, so is Zionism. Two more quick points, I promise. We cannot do this alone. We cannot do this alone. And it has been painful to see our quote-unquote allies stand idly by or actually go to the other side. It has been hard for me because ADL spends so much time, so much energy working in coalitions because it's the right thing to do. I don't believe there's a trade-off between particularism and universalism. It's one. It's one. But in this moment, we need to have the courage to pick up the phone and call those allies or to continue to try to find new ones. We should not be so precious that we say, oh, I can't talk to blank community because we don't agree on every issue. Folks, roll up your sleeves and buckle up and get ready for this ride. Because we need to continue to call in our new allies, and we need to our old allies and call in new ones. This is a very important message for the Reformed community in particular. Because I know so many of us who may identify with a particular political persuasion, I can't talk to them. They don't vote like me. They have certain views I just don't like. I get it. I don't agree with everything that my wife believes. Right? But I love her a lot. And I would just encourage all of us to think about, don't wait for the allies to call you. You can call them. And don't be so precious as not to make new friends. Lastly, I really want to, again, this is I think about this talk, and I thought about it when you asked me to do this, Rabbi Hirsch, as this is my message to the Reform rabbinate. And who am I? I'm not a rabbi. Who am I to say I'm not as learned as, Rabbi Wolpe or all of you in this room? But there's something that I heard in the opening remarks that I want to come back to and close on. We need principles, but they require parameters. We need beliefs, but they also require boundaries. We are not doing ourselves any service when we suggest that you can hold these values in the air, untethered to reality. So as you think about those new rabbis, who you may ordain or with whom you may work, Zionism can't be something that you do after shul. Zionism is as fundamental to our tradition, to our faith, to our peoplehood, as every other Jewish value that we speak of. So I think it's time for the reform movement and for all of our denominations to build those parameters, to structure those boundaries, and we will be better for it. Thank you very much.
We're giving you a standing ovation, too, to the audience.
So I want to acknowledge that we're running a bit short on time, as often happens at such things like this. And so I want to start by inviting our panelists to just begin with one word to describe the overall reality for Jewish students on campus in 2024. They might just all be on.
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. I struggle with being concise as a Jew. I'm really trying to focus on uplifting themes because this year has been so traumatic. So if I'm being completely candid, I would say traumatic, but because I'm trying to be positive, tikva, hope, is how I feel, definitely.
Thanks, Eden.
I think uneasy, because it's not, I mean, people would say to me at the beginning of the year, are my kids safe on campus? And yes, they were safe were there some incidents here or there? Yes, but it wasn't physical intimidation by and large that the students felt. What they felt was, look, Diane Allen, who is an African-American professor of government, said it very beautifully in the Washington Post article. She said, I think it's legally all right for a student to yell white power at a campus. She said, but I wouldn't send my kid to a campus where they did it because it's a hostile atmosphere. And I think that's what it was on campus for Jews. It was a hostile atmosphere.
Yeah, I would have said complicated. Because again, Jews are at all these institutions, and Jews are doing well at all these places. And yet, Rabbi Wolpe's right. I mean, it is hostile to so many of them. And yet there is a lot of hope, like Eden said. So I think overall it's complicated. ADL released a report card of institutions earlier this year. We did that to focus the mind. So not to be reductive and say Columbia gets a D, although they deserve D for deserve it. But to force people to look at what are the ways that Jewish life manifests at school and how are they doing. So overall, I think complicated may be a good word.
Thank you. Maybe we'll start with you for the next question. How can the Jewish community best collaborate to support Jewish students? In other words, how can the entirety of the American Jewish ecosystem, from synagogues to Hillels to federations and the ADL, support each other?
So I think two things. Number one, I will tell you there's more collaboration now than has ever happened before. Myself, the CEO of Jewish Federation North America, Eric Fingerhut, I'm going to give you the alphabet soup. The COP, the Conference of Presidents, William Daroff, Howard Core from APAC, and Ted Deutsch from AGC, we all talk once a week on a call that we self-organized. Once a week. We coordinate messaging and tactics, align agendas. Once a week. That never happened in the past. So I think in ADL, we've built partnerships with the reform movement, and we feel so lucky for that. As well as the conservative movement, and Chabad on campus, and Hillel, and BBYO, and we just announced something with Jaffe and Massa. I mean, we're doing a lot. So number one, collaboration really matters. None of us can do it alone. None of us can do it alone. I think the second thing, though, I think about something where Rabbi Hirsch kind of started, and I'll just say this myself, that we all have to also be accountable. We don't always get it right. I don't think I always get it right. And I think part of why we're in this mess is we've gotten some things wrong. So I think the American Jewish community needs to be intentional about collaboration, even as we are honest enough about the responsibility we need to take. The only way we get through this is if we correct our mistakes, we acknowledge our errors, and we do better.
Thank you. Rabbi Wolpe, I would like to ask you about your experience at Harvard in particular. In your op-ed in the Harvard Crimson in late December, titled "On the Hatred of Jews," you posed a question. If we cannot learn to argue civilly at Harvard, how can we hope for the civility of other places in the world? So what actions should university leaders take in order to help return civil discourse to Harvard and elsewhere?
I will say something about that, but in normal fashion, I'm also going to answer the question that you didn't ask me, which you asked Jonathan. Because this is really important. Take the money that you are giving to institutions that don't treat your children well, and give that money to institutions that treat your children well. There is no reason why Jews should be giving money right now to Columbia instead of Brandeis, for example, or Vanderbilt, or other places that have been good to our kids. I just want to say that. And in terms of I think that, and I had this discussion with university administrators, not only at Harvard, but elsewhere. Most of the universities, and I understand this actually is not true of Dartmouth, so I want to single them out for this. Most universities abdicated their responsibility of doing the following, which every head of a university ought to have done where there were campus protests. They should have brought some of the protesters and brought some of the Jewish students and had a professor who moderated and had them talk to each other, because that's what you do at an institution of higher learning. But they didn't do that. Instead, they allowed them to yell at each other and shun each other and create this horrible atmosphere because, frankly, no one was a grown-up, and it was dispiriting to see.
I got to just jump in and say something. Like, I totally agree with Rabbi Wolpe said about give your money to places that respect it, but on the other hand, I don't want us to surrender Columbia and Harvard to the anti-Semites and the anti-Zionists. We can't allow them to, create a narrative, seize a narrative that they make up, and we can't allow them to take over these institutions. So I've seen a lot of criticism of people like Mark Rowan and Bill Ackman. God bless Mark Rowan and Bill Ackman. Because let me tell you something, you all invest your money in businesses. You don't just, or you go to the restaurant, you just don't pay them if they don't give you good service. You demand better service. So we should be putting money to Brandeis, to Vanderbilt, and then we should be going back to Harvard and Columbia and saying, here's my money and here's what I expect from you for it. Would you ever write a blank check to anyone in any other vein? So I think it's crucial that we demand that these institutions respect our people, respect our values, and then if they don't do it, don't make concessions to them, give them consequences.
Completely agree.
I would also just add to that, I think the importance of being able to support students where they are. The work that students are doing on campus, whether that's giving them food or resources, whether that's giving them training or giving them social workers to talk through what's going on, that's also a big piece. And looking at the organizations that are there in the long run, working on those campuses, I think is a huge piece of how we also
Absolutely. Hillel is the front line in this fight. I feel so lucky. People like Brian Cohen in this city, Yehuda Kurtzman, they deserve, Yehuda Sarna, they deserve medals, literally, for what they've had to deal with.
And that actually leads us to a question, which is how can we best help Jewish college students?
I'll start, gladly. I think actually to build off of what you were just saying, send your kids to Columbia, send your grandkids to Columbia, because if we leave these schools, we're effectively giving the mob exactly what they want. They're saying it. They're saying Zionists off campus, Zionists out. If we leave those universities, we're saying, okay, here you go. And guess what? We're going to leave and go to other universities and wait for the same thing to happen there. I don't see a reality, unfortunately, in which it's practical to leave schools like Columbia and Harvard and go to a school like Vanderbilt and say, oh, well, everything's perfect here, and, wait for Vanderbilt to turn into Columbia, because that is what will happen. New York City is the hub of Jewish life, and look, everywhere you go is a torn down hostage poster. You walk around Columbia's campus and every other person is wearing a keffiyeh, and the kids next to you in class have laptop stickers that say resistance by any means necessary. this is the reality, and we don't have the privilege, I hate using that word, but we don't have the privilege of leaving these spaces that we worked so hard to get to, that our parents and grandparents sacrificed everything for, so that we could be in these spaces.
And so, Eden, maybe as a follow-up to that, there are no shortage of headlines about anti-Semitism at Columbia. So I'd like to ask you, as a Columbia student, what should we know about the vibrancy of your campus Jewish community that maybe we don't know about?
I love that question. I mean, I spoke about this a little bit before, but the Jewish community at Columbia is absolutely vibrant, and in many ways it's thriving. We have sort of different circles of religious life at Columbia, so you have like reform groups within Hillel, you have Orthodox groups, and traditionally they would never mix. I've been to all different services because I grew up in both conservative and reform synagogues, and I'm Sephardic, my parents are from Iran, we don't really do denominations in that way. And yet the communities never really mixed. Like, I never really had Orthodox friends at Columbia. And now I feel so blessed to say that some of the people I'm closest to in the world are Orthodox Jewish boys and girls who I didn't know on October 6th. And so it's incredibly powerful. And so I think that's definitely one thing. I've lost a lot of friends who I don't even consider friends anymore, because blocking me on Instagram without a conversation when we would have lunch every single week last year is hardly someone I'd consider a friend. But now, because of the Jewish community, because of Hillel and Chabad and people like Brian Cohen, the director of Columbia Hillel, we have these spaces that are really the definition of what a safe space should be. You can go and every single part of you will be accepted and loved for who you are. And these are the new friends that I've made. And so whether it's, knowing that there will be a hot meal waiting for us at the Craft Center at Hillel, or having an Ishai Rebo concert during finals week of last semester, or organizing the largest rally of Jewish students in the history of Columbia University on October 12th, Jewish life at Columbia is vibrant, and it is absolutely not going anywhere. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we don't go anywhere.
And I know that a lot of rabbis and educators in the room are wondering, well, how do they connect with their local campuses? And I think one of the first things is always to reach out to the Hillel leadership. Actually, summer is a better time to do that than when things are on fire. And not just offering support in the moments of most difficulty, but also, can I come and teach a class on any Jewish topic? Can I come and just hang out and offer pastoral support? Follow the lead of the professionals on campus. Being able to be part of a long-term relationship is much better than showing up on a one-time basis. But I think it's really important when we are thinking about Jewish life on campus is supporting the vibrancy in our local communities. So think about the schools that are near you. Think about the resources that are near you. I know that a lot of people have been paying a lot of attention to communities like Columbia that are making the news, but there are a lot of smaller schools under-resourced who need a lot of support and are looking for rabbinic leadership, for educational opportunities, especially from progressive Jews.
I want to add one more thing, which is, as Eden is an ideal example of, a lot of young leadership has come to the fore on college campuses, young Jewish leadership. And we are in desperate need of young Jewish leaders. So to the extent that you can, in your congregations, in your communities, at universities, support young Jewish leaders so that they get greater prominence and their peers see them. I don't want to be too crass about it, but when people see that young Jews their own age are getting kudos and getting positions and getting jobs for being Jewish leaders, the chances that they will be, most people are not like hardcore Jewish anti-Semites. The chances that they will want to follow that are increased. So elevating young Jews in positions of leadership is an absolute priority for the Jewish community right now.
Can I quickly add, I completely agree, and even to take
You're hired.
Thank you. But really, to take it back one step further, I think what makes a strong Jewish leader that you're describing is Jewish school. I went to Jewish day school until I was in 6th grade. And that is exactly, it's what made me who I am, and it's what formed my beliefs and my Jewish pride, as we spoke about earlier. And I see Rabbi Eshel sitting over there from Wilshire Boulevard Temple. My parents who sent me to Jewish school and Jewish summer camp. Truly, 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 it's what gives us the confidence to be such proud and vocal Jews. The majority of the Jewish students that are speaking out in this way went to Jewish school or Jewish summer camp at some point in their lives. It's a fact. So please tell everyone you know, go to Jewish school, even if it's just for a few years, even if it's until 6th grade like I did, it makes the world of a difference.
I think that's great. Totally agree. And if you have a chance to send your kids somewhere, and it's either Auschwitz or Tel Aviv, send them to Tel Aviv. Show them what Jews have built, not just what we've suffered. Do both if you can, but make sure your kids go to Israel so that it's not an abstraction, so they actually see what we've created.
And it's important to note, if we think about the current students on campus, many of them have not been to Israel because of COVID, because of the war. And so for the first time in a long time, many of us remember a pre-birthright era. The majority of Jewish students on campus have not had an Israel experience through no fault of their own. But I think rebuilding a culture of visiting Israel, volunteering in Israel, studying abroad in Israel is really important. And I will note that a lot of schools, one of the demands of pro-boycott, divestment, and sanctions movements is to end study abroad programs in Israel, to take away any study abroad funding or resources, or also to cancel any programs that were designed for non-Jewish students to come to Israel, and demonizing that. And so I think the support of offering those opportunities coming from congregational leadership, coming from local community leadership is really important.
But by the way, that's no accident. It is no accident. It is no accident that the other side doesn't want students to go to Israel. It is no accident that the other side wants to criminalize these exchange programs, wants to throw these, shlichim off of campuses. They don't want, they have a narrative they want to drive. They don't have a truth they want students to explore. So we should just acknowledge, the doctrinaire regime of the other side is really quite profound.
The questions that have come in are all about alliances, so I want to offer them all up for the whole group, and answer each part as you see fit. What are we doing, or should we be doing, around interfaith relationships? How can we re-engage with our former allies? What would you say to those who are nervous about forming or developing relationships with allies? What is your suggestion, advice around allyship right now?
I can start, sure. I'll let Rabbi Wolpe speak about the interfaith aspect. I will say, on campus, it has been, I think, the largest challenge is building allies and maintaining allies. Last semester, I'm president of Students Supporting Israel, which is an advocacy club at Columbia. We're not a political club, we're a culture club. And we went to the student government and said, we really want to have a conversation with the leaders of the pro-Palestinian groups of Students for Justice in Palestine, which I don't consider pro-Palestinian, but that's another conversation, because they are explicitly pro-Hamas and thus anti-Palestinian. But the student government said, I'm so sorry, they will not speak to you. They will not speak to you. There is an anti-normalization doctrine that these groups have adopted, and the problem is that it isn't just SJP and JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace, that have this. It is the Columbia University Apartheid Divest Coalition, which represents over 100 clubs and thousands of students. And the same exists at Harvard, at Penn, at schools across the country. This isn't unique to Columbia. But because these clubs, it's like, the Reproductive Justice Collective and the Indian Dance Group, like clubs that have nothing to do with this conflict, have now signed on to this coalition. They won't engage with Zionists, so the majority of Jewish students. They will not speak to, literally will not look at you in the eye because you are a Zionist. And so it's been really difficult to build those coalitions, in all honesty. There have been individuals that have come to us and said, I really want to attend your events, but I'm afraid of the social repercussion. Can I join on Zoom with no name? Is that okay? Because I want to learn about your perspective, but I can't do it publicly. And as heartbreaking as that is, we aren't in a position to say no to those people. We aren't in a position to be as critical as we would like to be of those people, because we need allyship in all the ways we can get, and that starts with education because of how much misinformation there is. So when it comes to building allies, at least on campus, we kind of have to take what we can get, and it's heartbreaking, it is, but that's just the reality.
Thank you for naming that, Eden, and just the piece of that being a long kind of developing trend and not unique to Columbia by any means. And so often when people from the outside look at campus, they say, why can't students just sit down together? And the reality is, Jewish organizations like Hillel are proponents of dialogue, but they're being told that there's no opportunity. And the fact that those student groups are refusing to speak to Jewish groups or Zionist groups, the university is often allowing for that or supporting that and kind of furthering that anti-normalization that you spoke of. Rabbi Wolpe.
So I'm a big tent guy, partly because my congregation was politically very divided. On a Shabbos morning before COVID, we would have about 1,000 people, and about 600 of them would be Trump voters. And the other 400 would be Trump haters. And they all had to sit in the same sanctuary. And one of the things that I learned, which, by the way, Jonathan Haidt's work has reinforced, is that every side thinks the views of the other side are more extreme than in fact they are. Because they don't talk to each other, they just form mental images of each other. So everybody on the right thinks the left are anti-Semites, and on the left they think on the right are fascists. And if you actually speak to each other, you have a much better chance of understanding someone than if you just decide who they are. So I'm willing to take allies for Israel from all sides of the political spectrum, and I think if you don't, you're being foolish. I really think so. You can make very clear, I don't agree with you about this, I won't work with you about that, but this I will work with you about, and that I will work with you about. So, for example, I had a very weird experience. There's about to be multiple name droppings here, so get ready. I was in an Uber going somewhere, and my phone rings. I didn't recognize the number, and I answered it just on a whim, and the guy on the other end says, "This is Van Jones." And I said, "Okay." And he said, I'd never spoken to Van Jones, didn't know him. I know Jonathan knows him, but I didn't. He said, "I got your number from Sheryl Sandberg, whom I also had never met or spoken to." I said, "It all traced back to a congregant. It always does." But he said, "I want to do a service with black pastors and rabbis." And some of you were part of that service. And we did this beautiful service. T.D. Jakes spoke. It was wonderful. And then I did a Milken event with him. And he said, "I say to my black friends, you think," you could watch this online, he was tremendous at this event. He said, "You think you have white friends, but you don't. What you have are Jewish friends. And your friend Jared, who you think is white, is Jewish. Your friend Rachel, who you think is white, they're Jewish." He said, "In fact, if Jews were purple, blacks would have no white friends." And I want you to know, I sat the other night at a city I won't name, at a table I won't name, with a donor I won't name. I sat next to a woman who said to me, I'm done with the black community, they're all anti-Semitic. And I went through this whole thing, and I even showed her the ADL statistics, which showed that anti-Semitic levels are high in the black community, but when you say high, you're still talking about less than half. So, are you going to write off an entire community? Are you going to write off everybody who votes for Trump? Because obviously they're all fascists and idiots. I want you to know, I know very close. I have married, buried, done bar mitzvahs, done wedding, done hospital visits for many, many, many people who vote for Trump. And if that's your image of them, then you're being foolish. Half this country are not fascists. They may radically differ with you about all sorts of things, but unless you actually talk to them and discuss, not watch like one night of Fox News, but talk to them, or one night of Newsmax, and find out why they believe what they believe and what they say. I would have, for example, I know I'm going on too long, but let me just tell you, more than half of my congregation came from Iran. And sometimes they would say to me, "Look, Rabbi, you're a very nice man, but you grew up in Philadelphia." And I would say, "You know what, you're right. Your life experience is radically different from mine. So instead of telling you what I think you should believe, why don't you tell me about your life experience?" And astonishingly enough, I learned a lot. So don't let your mental construction of who someone else is supplant who they actually are. Instead, go find out, and you might be surprised.
I mean, I tried to make this point in my remarks about allies, right? I think we've got to not wait for the phone to ring. We've got to pick up the phone. We shouldn't be so precious we're not willing to talk to new people. And I think we've got to model this behavior. By the way, like, again, I come back to the Reform Rabbinate, you know? I loved what you said, Rabbi Hirsch, about the RAC. I want the RAC to prioritize Zionism when they engage with other groups. I want them to talk about this. Not to say we'll talk about it later. We'll talk about it now. Because this is who we are. This is who we are. Now, I'll say something else. I think we also have to model this behavior. Look, I took a lot of flack, as some of you may have heard, because I invited Jared Kushner, and we gave an award at ADL a few months ago for the Abraham Accords. And I got a lot of, no one should clap, because that isn't the point. I had a lot of people wring their hands. I had people resign from our board. But you know what? Who are we if we're not willing to try harder, to reach across the aisle? And yeah, if you don't think the Abraham Accords was a good thing, then maybe you should leave the ADL. If you can't handle celebrating the Abraham Accords, maybe ADL isn't the right place for you. But my point is not, like, again, like, the issue here is we have to model what Rabbi Wolpe's talking about. So yes, welcome others, and it's not easy, like Eden said, but we've got to be willing to try harder in these moments that are such trying ones.
So I want to thank all of our panelists so very much for their time and their expertise. Moderating a panel means starting off, but it also means getting to have the microphone at the end. And I just want to say, you know, there's a song in Israel that came out recently about how the people of Israel is full of heroes, ordinary people who are serving in the reserves, who are supporting society, who are helping the displaced, the hostages, the injured. And there was a lot of attention in Israel criticizing the young generation, saying that they were, you know, startup nation and they were materialistic and they weren't people of strong character. And in the days since October 7th, they have distinguished themselves as an incredible generation, really an incredible generation. And I would be remiss if I didn't speak on behalf of our college students like Eden here, that we have an incredible generation of young people on campus, both in leadership roles, in Hillel and Chabad and other organizations, and really our students, people who are doing the work on a daily basis, supporting our students in so many ways. And I just would end by encouraging you this summer, while many of your students are home, to reach out, invite them to coffee, hear their words about what's going on campus, and offer your support. Thank you.